one of the reasons I'm running is about policy and having the right policies in place that benefit Cayman as a whole, growing, and Caymanians themselves being a part of the growth process and benefiting. One of the issues that we have in Cayman is we look at prosperity and we think about, economic growth. And when we look at economic growth, we have to be honest with ourselves. Who's actually benefiting from economic growth? Usually, in many countries, only the top 10% or the top 1% of the population is actually seriously benefiting from economic growth. And when you look at the rest of the economy in terms of prosperity, we find that there's so many people on a lower income. In Cayman, for example, many people earn $2,500 or less per month. And if you look at rent alone, rent is already around $2,000. So most of your money is going to rent and the other parts of high cost of living. Overall, the situation that we have here is income inequality and lack of opportunities. Going forward, we have to think about, in terms of prosperity, we have to think about financial resilience. Next year, 2021, is going to be a very difficult year because we need to think about how Caymanians are going to survive in terms of financial resilience. So if there's not enough job opportunities to enable people to pay their bills, if you can't pay your bill, you are going to default. If you default, then you go into the welfare system. The same situation for the government. We will need a strong finance minister to keep this country in shape. So I look forward to someone like Mr. Chris Saunders or Roy McTaggart in that kind of situation. The other thing we need to pay attention to for overall balance after we consider prosperity is our environment. We see breaches such as concrete being poured into mangroves. We still have the Mount Trashmore situation. It's uncertain what the future is going to be dealing with trash. Like I said just now, we have ignorance of environmental laws, no punishment following that. We have these buildings being built close to shorelines. As we can see, some properties lost their beaches. We still have a high level of traffic and therefore pollution. So prosperity, looking at an environment. The next thing is our people. Human capital. How are we going to make sure that people have the proper skills in order to reposition themselves in other industries if tourism does not recover properly? What is the plan? What is the plan for education? Are we going to continue to focus on buildings and constantly changing the curriculum when we be focusing on all stakeholders working together, the school leaders, the school teachers, the parents, the students, other adults in the school system, and having resources and funding wrapping around all of that? What is going to be our future approach to education? Building more buildings or making sure that the methods that we use are effective on learning? Also, when we think about people, so that's human capital. The other thing to think about when we think about people is public health. How much money are we going to spend in public health given what we've seen happen during COVID, which is there are a lot of people who did not have access to medication or proper health care during COVID. We saw a situation where when people were forced to go on emergency lockdown, when there was an outbreak in a particular school, or when one child had tested positive, we saw that when people are going to emergency lockdown situations, that there was not a package that was available to them. So there was not a healthcare package, there was not a financial package that will go towards the financial resilience. There was not a mental and well-being package caused by that sudden lockdown situation. And the last thing we need to think about when we think about people is social resilience. So we saw during the lockdown how so many charities worked together, and we saw how people came together in the community to help each other. And going forward, we need to have that same social resilience present in our communities going forward. And the last thing is, the institutional context. So we gotta balance prosperity, which ultimately is linked to our well-being and happiness as a people. We have to think about our environment. We have to think about our human capital, public health, social resilience. And the last thing we need to think about is overall structure, which is what we call the institutional context. So when we think about the last thing, which is institutional, we think about what we mentioned earlier is this negative trend in terms of freedom of press. We see less press being available. We see press that you have to pay for, you have to subscribe to. So that's increasing the difficulty in access to the press. We see comments from our own government that when we express our freedom of expression, that it's deemed to be rubbish, it's deemed to be fake news. So we have that negative trend in terms of freedom of press. We have concerns about judicial independence and court independence. We have concerns about legal frameworks, whether there's conflicts of interest, whether laws are being passed in the best interest of Caymanians and Cayman as a whole to create an infrastructure to provide opportunity for Caymanians to grow and participate in the economy. We have issues with budget transparency. We have issues with overall level of trust that we've seen change pre-COVID, which I think was deteriorating pre-COVID. And then during COVID, the level of trust in government grew because people felt that the government protected us during the lockdown and kept us safe, which is true. But then we see the level of trust post-lockdown going down because although people acknowledge that the government kept people safe during lockdown, is decreasing post-lockdown because we see the types of laws that the government is willing to pass to create benefits and opportunities for others coming into Cayman and others who've had the economic prosperity of Cayman all these years, but then we don't see any accompanying legislation or any accompanying policies or actions that help Caymanians themselves to have access to economic opportunities, access to jobs, and access to things that can lift them out of their current situations. So overall, what I'm saying is we have to have a plan going forward that just balances prosperity, balances the environmental issues, balances the people issues, which are, like I said, public health, education skills, social issues, and balancing the overall framework that all of this is able to work properly.